Okay, so we will begin. There may be others who will join us along the way, but they can slip in and pick up as they join. This presentation is prepared by the Protection Island Emergency Preparedness Committee, along with assistance from the Protection Island Lions Club and Prepared BC. And the purpose of the presentation is to enhance awareness and provide guidance to the community to help in personal preparedness as well as community-based preparedness for a potential disaster. Before we begin the meat of the presentation, we are grateful for and appreciate the opportunity to speak today from the traditional territory and ancestral homeland of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. And this is their website. I'm not sure if anyone has ever gone to look at their website, but please do visit their website for more information. By way of introduction and a few housekeeping things, this presentation really addresses the island's resiliency. No matter what presents itself in the future, we thank you for your support and attendance today. We're very grateful to have you here. We will have a number of sites, websites referenced in the presentation as we go. And rather than you trying to scribble them all down quickly, and you won't be able to keep up in some cases, some of the website addresses are quite technical. So we will send an email to ProWile that lists all of the key links for you from the presentation. So don't try to write all those down. As Peter mentioned, we'll be recording the presentation, or we are recording the presentation, and so those that couldn't join us today still will have an opportunity to view it over at the Lions YouTube channel, and we'll let people know when that's up and available. And I think the best, because there is quite a bit of material that we're going through, the best thing to do with questions, if it's okay with folks, to keep the technical Zoom part working well, is to hold your questions until the end. Peter will be monitoring the chat, and so if you want to put anything in terms of the question into the chat, he'll monitor that, and then we'll do our best to answer questions as we get to the end. So a big challenge will present itself for us in the event of a future disaster. Should we stay or should we go? There are many events that could lead to a catastrophic occurrence here that impacts our island. Two main concerns, I think everyone is talking these days about wildfire in the province, and that's certainly a significant concern for us here on Protection Island. And the ubiquitous earthquake, the big one. And those are two good examples of the opposite ends of the spectrum. In the case of a wildfire, it would be important for each of us to be ready to very quickly evacuate the island. And so in terms of being prepared to leave, it's important that you know that there are 4 muster points on the island, and we'll have a map showing those in a minute. But the way you would, there's a good chance the way you would be notified of the emergency is through the Voyant Alert system. It's the system that the province uses to alert British Columbians about emergencies. And you can get the app for your smartphone, if you haven't already, for those who have smartphones, at the Apple Store, the Google Play Store, wherever you buy your apps. Voyant Alert would be an important one to have on your smartphone. If you don't have a smartphone, it is possible to register online, and you'll receive phone alerts to your landline. I think you can also arrange for alerts to come to you by way of email. So those, the Voyant Alert system, they test it periodically. And so this is a very important thing in emergency preparedness, is for each of us to be tapped into that. Now, in terms of the muster points on the island, there are 4. And the arrows are coming in here to show you where those are. Pirates Causeway, just off Pirates Lane in the north. In the south, Gallows Point boat ramp. In the east, you've got Smugglers Park, just off Captain Morgan's Boulevard. And in the west, Pirates Park, Mud Bay Dock. The importance of knowing where these points are was really highlighted as we watched the news out of the wildfire in Lytton. People didn't know where to go. And so we saw news stories of folks kind of going in whatever direction they thought was the best. These muster points will give you a focal point for where to go. And we'll come back to these muster points a few times during the presentation. Now the question is then next, you get to the muster points, you are either evacuated from those muster points or you are shuttled from your muster point to the place where the evacuations are happening. And then where do you go? In the past, we've been told that the cruise ship terminal is the spot, but that is not the case any longer. If we do need to evacuate to Nanaimo, it's important to know that residents in boats should head to the visiting vessel pier over by the boat basin just off Cameron Island, not the cruise ship terminal. This visiting vessel pier is the correct place to go. And in fact, those who don't have boats when they are evacuated, this is where they will be brought as well. There'll be a registration center there, as I understand it. And so this is the very important point to remember in your emergency planning. If you happen to be in town while Protection Island experiences an emergency and begins evacuating, if you're able to come down to the visiting vessel pier, that is also important, so that will help to account for islanders who may not have been on the island at the time of the evacuation, to register there. Or alternatively, I believe there is a reception center that would be opened at Beban Recreation Facility. And if you happen to be there, if that's the closest place for you to go, you go there and let them know where you're from, and then there will be a linkage so that the registration for Protection Island residents who are evacuating will be cross-referenced to whatever they learn at Bevan. So a very important spot to remember in your planning. If, on the other hand, we have an earthquake, we might not have the ability to evacuate. Nanaimo, if it's a big earthquake, chances are will not be in any condition to receive us. It would not be safe there. The safest place is for you to stay on the island in that case. And so we have to be prepared to take care of ourselves and our neighbors for a lengthy period of time, potentially. And there are individuals and organizations that are here to help in the case of emergencies. These 4 groups specifically have been working together on this presentation and continue to work together to pool and share their resources, along with many volunteers who aren't associated with these groups, to make sure that we have a good island awareness. But I need to emphasize at this point, and you will hear this from me several times during the presentation, the first priority, the most important thing, is for each of us to be prepared ourselves as individuals. These groups, we'll talk about each of these groups in the next few minutes, but the primary importance is for personal preparedness, for all of our planning to really meld together and work. Now, if you happen to be willing to donate your skills, time, effort, materials to the preparedness effort, and you're not already linked in, but you want to be, there's an email address that, again, will be shared with folks in the follow-up messaging, but it's protectionislandemergency@gmail.com. And you can get in touch through that email address and you will become linked into the community effort. So again, first and foremost, prepare yourself. And then the groups and other efforts on the island will be better positioned to help you if you are prepared for yourself. And in terms of staying, again, you may see this in a few places, but we need to plan to be sheltering in place here on the island for anywhere from 3 to 7 to 10 days. You see those 3 numbers in various material. And so for up to 10 days, but maybe 7 is the good benchmark, be prepared for 7 days. In terms of the groups that are out there to help us as island residents, the Lions Club has been active on the island for 37 years, I think, fulfilling all sorts of roles around the island over time. But the particular one that I want to emphasize here in this context is the management of Beacon House. In an emergency situation, Beacon House kicks in to offer a premises for a community hub. There will be more mentioned as we go forward in the presentation, but the Beacon House facility will be the place to go, the place to rely upon for reliable information, particularly if cell phone towers go down, if power is out, phones don't work. We are working on methods to ensure that Beacon House can stay connected to the outside world and be a source for reliable information. And in a sheltering situation, information that is reliable is your first defense in terms of surviving the sheltering situation. There will also be other materials there that we'll talk about a little bit later. So Beacon House is the Lions' big contribution to this effort. Perhaps at this time, I will turn over to Peter to talk about the role of emergency support services.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Yes, Emergency Support Services is a subsidiary of EMBC, Emergency Management BC. What we do is look after people for the first 72 hours of a catastrophic event. This is used more in places like Nanaimo General, where if somebody has a house fire, they have to leave, they have no clothes, they have no accommodation, maybe no transportation. The province will look after a family for 72 hours until their insurance kicks in or until they can pass them on to the Red Cross to give them a more lengthier time frame. But for the first 72 hours, Emergency Support Services will register you and then set you up for referrals for anything that you might need. Both Kathy Goldsmith and myself have worked for the last week on call for the evacuees at Lytton and also surrounding First Nations peoples. And we can tell you honestly that those people had no time whatsoever. They were all accommodated and looked after for food, accommodation, clothing, and transportation by the province. It can happen that quickly, guys. Fire is nothing to be, you know, that you have to be aware that it can happen very, 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 very quickly. You've got to be prepared if possible. That's all I want to say about emergency services at this time. I just wanted to point out here that there's kind of like this cycle of things that happen when there's an emergency. Basically, it's the response teams, and that's what ESS is a response team. There are teams for recovery, teams for mitigation, and you'll hear more about these teams as we go into the presentation. And there's teams for preparation. So the team that we're listening to today, PIEPC, for instance, would be a prep team. So we're trying to, on the island, look after all areas. Thanks, Jim.
Okay. And next, I'd like to call on Kathy, I believe, to talk about more of the PIEPC.
Hi, yeah. Just sort of a brief introduction for background information for those who may not know what the Protection Island Emergency Preparedness Committee is. We were formed after the horrific windstorm in December 2018 that I'm sure many of you remember well. It resulted in a major power outage for close to a week. At that time, many of us as individuals realized we were not prepared for a major disaster or an event, and as well as realizing that our community was not as prepared as we could be. So we had a number of community meetings, and out of that formed a team of approximately 10, 12 of us to begin with, as well as a number of extra volunteers that helped us along the way. We gathered information about the needs of our community and came up with 4 priorities. One was the need for a space for a warming center in the event of any kind of a disaster where we're still staying on the island. We needed a backup generator, somewhere with washrooms, cell phone charging ability, and a source of communication. And as Jim Menzies has already mentioned, we approached the Lions Club, who generously agreed to not only provide the space of Beacon House as a warming center, but also provided funds to purchase a powerful generator, which we already have. Now, we also identified a need for households to have more information on how to be better individually prepared in a disaster. We created an emergency package, preparedness package for individual households, and we hand delivered these packages to all households on the island. It included a workbook that had been previously put together. So as I say, we delivered those to residents on the island at that time. However, we also recognize there's been a lot of new members since then, and luckily we have quite a pile of these packages left. So if there is any members who either want another package or are new to the island and didn't receive one, my contact information will be put in the email that will subsequently go out, and please feel free to call me or email me, and I will drop a package off to you. The third thing we identified was a need for a method to communicate islanders and get information to them quickly in the event of an emergency. So members of our committee have continued to work on that, and you'll get a bit of an update in a few minutes about our telephone tree in this presentation. And fourth and finally, we identified a need to learn more about emergency management in general, the structure in the city as well as provincially. We didn't know a whole lot about emergency preparedness and how it works. So we knew that there was a need to form a liaison with the city of Nanaimo and learn a lot more. So a number of our committee members joined the essential support services in Nanaimo, as Peter talked about, and we've continued to be involved. We've continued to take further training. A number of us are doing courses in emergency preparedness, as well as Peter said, supporting evacuees both locally and more recently provincially. I think the events of recent weeks in the province have certainly highlighted for me the importance of being as prepared as we can be as individuals, and even more particularly as a community. So that's us.
Thank you, Kathy. And as Peter mentioned before, the Emergency Preparedness Committee fulfills both preparation and response in that little cycle. Next, I would like to turn it over to Rick to talk about FireSmart. And Rick, I know you have several slides in here, so you just say when you want me to shift these slides forward.
Sure, thanks, Jim. I guess before I start, I just wanted to, excuse me, thank Peter and Kathy and Ken and the rest of the group that's been working on this. It's a small group of people with a huge job. I guess speaking from personal experience, being a volunteer on Protection Island can sometimes be fairly challenging, and I'm so happy you guys have persevered and you're coming up with some pretty awesome stuff that's going to keep us all pretty safe. So I definitely commend you guys on your efforts there. So yeah, we could switch into FireSmart. We started a couple of years ago. Neil and Peter Rombo, Wendy Chandler, and David was on our team as well. And basically we had to start from scratch. And so these are our basic objectives. A lot of education, and the key thing for us is resiliency. We want to try and make the island as resilient as possible to fire and think ahead and try and mitigate any impacts, whether they're immediate or down the road. We'll talk a little bit about some of the restoration work we're doing in some of the parks, etc. But we did a plan that we evaluated the whole island with the fire department, came up with priority areas and the strategy for dealing with them. And we're into basically our fourth event will be this fall to try and deal with that kind of stuff. And basically, to have FireSmart as a long-term entity, we had to be recognized as a FireSmart community. There's a few hoops we had to go through. One thing that really helped us be recognized as a FireSmart community is volunteer hours, and our volunteer hours for the last couple of years have been off the charts. We think we're required to generate something like 750 volunteer hours per year, and each event we're rolling into 10 to 15,000 hours, so 100 hours. So we're well above what, and it just shows that people are concerned and they're cooperating for sure on making things more resilient on the island. So we can just go to the next slide. Basically, our plan identified 4 zones on Protection Island. My coloring isn't that great, but basically we've got our boulevards and our parks, our public spaces. Parks are about 19% of the island. Boulevards, I'm not exactly sure the percentage, but we do have some significant issues on our boulevards as well. Ladder fuels, some high grass, branches that go right down to the road, that kind of stuff. And it's also the zone where we have the most activity, even simple things like long grass and hot mufflers, if they just happen to pull off into the long grass, can spark a fire in an instant. So that's the focus for our fall program. Our events is on our public spaces. The second area in red is vacant private lots. Some have cabins or non-occupied structures, but basically the vacant lots, and that obviously is changing as well, as all these vacant lots are having houses on them pretty rapidly here. So, and then the last one is just our lots with structures. So those are kind of our 4 zones, and we've kind of generated an annual plan based on those zones. We can carry on here. So our park work, the map shows the parks, and the stuff that's crosshatch is work that we've already completed or where areas where work was not required. So we're kind of grinding our way through the parks. we did a portion of Hidden Treasure Park and Elizabeth Park last year. So what we're trying to do is, as we do these parks, we've had incredibly good buy-in from the neighbors, and they form little work parties and are trying to do maintenance work in each park so that we're not just chasing our tail, doing some work, and then in a couple of years we have to go do it again. So that's been working really well.
You remember seeing me again, Thor, yesterday?
Yes, I do, Hamish.
Yeah, I'm just double checking. Frederico tried calling you to let you know that he won't be coming in today, but tomorrow he will be. So I'm just going to call him right now to give you some reassurance, because he did want to talk to you.
Sure where this is coming from here.
Peter, I think you have to mute Thora.
Oh, I better.
Oh, you're on the phone?
Well, no, this is the neighborhood meeting. I better just turn.
Okay, let's start. Oh, hi, Thora. So anyways, so this year our restoration project is Ben Gunn Park behind the mailboxes at the Four Corners, and that park's been heavily impacted by dead grand fir over the last few years, and we're doing a lot of planting in that park and pulling all the invasives and that kind of stuff. And there's going to be also some trail work done in there this year. One of the things that we're trying to do with all our projects is combine as many groups so we can kind of maximize our volunteer hours. So we're dealing with invasive plants, trying to deal with some Gary Oak issues. Basically, just trying to encompass as much as we can as we're doing our Fire Smart work. We're fortunate that we're one of the groups that actually has a bit of money. So if we can support the other groups and help them along as well, that seems to be working quite well. So Blackbeard Park is the furthest park to the north of the island. Not a lot of work to do there, but we just want to reestablish the 2 access points there. And then our major project for this year is the hillside in Pirates Park. Basically, when you go down the stairs, the hillside on either side, there's a lot of holly in there, a lot of branches that come right to the ground. So we just want to, hillsides are pretty volatile areas, especially when you have houses right on the top of them. So we want to kind of treat that area this year. So that's kind of our projects for this year. And then where do we go from here? Just wait for Jim to click her over for me, please. There we go. Okay, so we've identified a couple of ignition types that could create some problems for us. The biggest issue, of course, is if there was ever a catastrophic fire on Newcastle. The lead part of the fire sparks quite a ways ahead of the fire, and the gap isn't much of a fire barrier from Newcastle. So if there was a catastrophic fire on Newcastle, we could, and the winds were correct, we could easily expect fire branding from Newcastle. So that, I mean, that would, in a catastrophic event, that would be our worst case scenario there. The next ignition type is on our public spaces. Illegal fires really count from campfires, smoking. We mentioned before, mufflers and dry grass. So that's always an issue that everybody should be paying attention to. And then the last ignition type is actually in residences. And, you know, however a fire could start in your residence, barbecues, cooking fires, you know, or we're all getting older. We tend to leave our barbecues on sometimes overnight. So, you know, we just got to be paying attention to those kind of things, or things as significant as a structure fire that, you know, that's could be a big issue. We haven't had a structure fire on the island for a few years, but you know, we've been pretty fortunate so far. So those are the main ignition types we've identified on the island. And then the next thing we try and address is fire spread. We have kind of 2 main objectives. So the first objective is we want to keep the fire on the ground. Our fire department, or any fire department, is really not going to be able to deal with a fire if it's up in the crowns of the trees. So that's the whole premise behind getting rid of ladder fuels, getting the branches cut up a couple meters on trees. Is we got to keep that fire on the ground so that either residents or the fire department can extinguish it and manage it without it getting up into the canopy. And the second objective is we've got to reduce the chances of house-to-house ignition. And we always talk about all the things that people can do in their own yards, on their own houses, you know, cleaning up all your branches, leaves, needles, cleaning out your gutters, establishing some WASP fire protection kits or some kind of sprinkler system and high combustibility times. You know, making sure your firewood isn't stacked up against your house. And basically anything that's going to allow a fire to move quickly from structure to structure. You know, that's really the other issue. Other than fires getting up in the canopy, our fire department is going to be really taxed if there's multiple fires. If they can deal with a single structure fire, but if there's multiple structures on fire, even with support from the city, you know, it's gonna spread pretty fast if we don't take some basic measures to keep fire from spreading house to house. So I think that's kind of it. I mean, we could talk for quite a long time on various things, but you know, that's kind of an overview. We're more into resiliency and looking ahead and trying to plant trees, plant shrubbery that's going to be a little more fire resistant and still give us our privacy. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. That last picture of the preventing house-to-house spread, that almost looked like what Lytton looks like, although I know that wasn't Lytton, so scary stuff. So have you ever thought about how to prepare for an emergency? How would you look after yourself and others in your household for up to 7 or even 10 days without power, without water? How would you cope if you did have to evacuate on very, very short notice? How would you contact your family, get information that you need to survive an emergency situation? It's really all about having a plan, but Prepared BC conducted a survey back in 2017, and they found that only just 54% of British Columbians said that their household had an emergency plan, and only 13% described their plan as complete. And so those are kind of disappointing statistics. So one of the goals of our group, one of the goals of presentations like this, is to help encourage people to go through the 3 steps to preparedness. Know your hazards, make your plan, and gather your supplies. So the first step is know your hazards. Now we talk about various different. Somehow I skipped this. Bear with me a second. There we go. So we talk about a lot about wildfire and earthquakes, but there are other hazards. Before talking about the specifics, though, it's important to understand that there are some misconceptions out there. Often people think, oh, the emergency will be short-lived. In fact, although you may have a short-lived disaster, the impact of that can go on for a long time. I won't ever need to deal with an emergency where I live, as a common, or has been a common misconception, and now here we are in the middle of a global emergency, essentially with the pandemic. There's a misconception you can't prepare. In fact, you can. There are common consequences that you can be prepared for, and that's really what we're talking about here today. And people worry that preparing takes too much time. In fact, you can prepare a plan in a reasonable amount of time. You can buy or assemble a kit easily, spread that process out over time. So the top 10 hazards in BC, as defined by Prepared BC, are here. The ones that probably affect Protection Island most directly. Wildfires, as Rick was just speaking about, and as is so much in the news these days in other parts of BC. Earthquakes, we've talked about. There's an average of 3,000 earthquakes reported in BC each year. Most of them you don't feel, but we're becoming due for a much larger one, the geologists will tell you. Disease outbreaks, that's with us still. Severe weather, I think Kathy was mentioning the windstorm that we had back in 2018. That was BC Hydro's most damaging storm that they've experienced in their history, with 750,000 customers without power. 550,000 had their power restored within the first 24 hours, but we were among those who were delayed much longer than that, almost a week, as Kathy mentioned. So severe weather and power outages often will go together for us here on PI. So it's important to think about what are the hazards, and once you've thought about what are the hazards, then the next step is to make the plan. An emergency plan is a playbook for how you and your household would respond to a disaster. Knowing what to do ahead of time will reduce your anxiety and help keep you focused, and that helps keep you safe. Again, using the Lytton experience, people were confused about what they should do. The instructions that were coming to the community weren't always passed on well. And because people seemed to not have their own plans, some people experienced a high degree of anxiety. So the first thing is about information and communication. Know how you will communicate. And use and support the community phone tree is my opportunity to segue over to a bit of a talk about the phone tree that is being developed for Protection Island. And I'm not sure, is Thora going to speak to this, or is Kathy going to speak to this?
Kathy is speaking to it.
Kathy? Okay, Kathy, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, members of the PIEPC have been continuing to work on the telephone tree over the last 1.5 to 2 years. The purpose is to have an alternate but quick way to reach islanders in case of a major disaster. The island's has been divided into 10 zones for the purposes of this telephone tree, and each zone has been appointed a coordinator. And those coordinators have all been contacted, and they've agreed that if it's necessary to communicate with island people, the coordinator in each zone will call 5 or 6 people in their zone and have them relay whatever the message is. And all of the callers have been confirmed, the zone coordinators and the callers. The phone numbers that we've gathered will not be shared outside of the phone tree, just so you know. If you're listed in the 2021 PI phone book, you've been added to the tree. If you're not listed in the PI phone book, or if you're new to the island, you won't have been added. You're to call Thora Howell to be added with your name, address, and phone number. If you're not in the phone book, to please contact her. And again, we'll include Thora's contact information in the follow-up email. We're planning on doing a test run this month of the procedure, so expect to get a call. And just, I guess, to keep in mind that the phone tree is a work in progress, especially in recent times as people are moving on, moving off, people are buying, people are selling. We'd really appreciate knowing when somebody new moves to the island. If you can, again, let Thora know, she could be adding you to the phone tree or new members that we can contact. So hopefully that covers it, Thora, but thank you for those who have worked so hard on this telephone tree.
Yes, thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you, Thora, has put an awful lot of time into that process. So in addition to knowing how you'll communicate, it's important to know where to find information. It's always best to start with local sources, particularly in today's connected world. If you simply go on to Google and if you're in an emergency and you type Protection Island earthquake, for example, you might end up with sources that are on the opposite side of the world. So it's important to have local sources. This is another one of those places where we highlight that the reception center at Beacon House, in the case of an emergency, will have official links with reliable sources of information. And so it will become a communication and information hub. In addition to that, then of course, websites, social media, phone numbers, having reliable connections with people on the outside is important, but it may not be possible if the cell phone towers are down, if the phone lines are down. So multiple sources of communication, start local, rely on the communications from Beacon House that we're doing our best to make, no pun intended, faster pace. In terms of reliable source online, emergencyinfobc.ca, or if you're a Twitter user, @emergencyinfobc, there will be official and reliable information there. And we'll include that, that link in our email for later. Another piece of information that it's important to have included in your plan is your health-related information. You should write down relevant health information like your care card number, your family doctor, connections, your medications, any medical equipment, other health information. Have that as part of your plan so that you're not fumbling to remember, or if you're unable to speak for yourself, others will have access to those things written down if they're needed. There's considerations around your home. Know and even map your home's emergency exits. It's something special about writing it down. If you stop and look around your home and you think about it, you'll get one level of memory. If you actually write a map down, marking your exits, that will help to solidify those locations in your memory. If you're in a panic situation, the deeper those memories are, the more likely you are to use those memories. Identify and practice your escape routes, both from your home and from your neighborhood. And that goes back to the muster points that we mentioned earlier. Know where those are, know how to get from your home to those muster points. Important information, other information about your home. Again, have a list of important contacts, utility companies, and so on. So the idea of writing it down is important to help you with your planning. And speaking of utility companies, some of us on the island have these little devices that carry propane, but in the case of a wildfire may become a bomb. And so you need to know how to safely turn those off. Disconnect, roll, or carry the tank a safe distance from your home. Some of the tanks are really big, I know that. But be aware that you have this potentially explosive device near your home, and be aware of how to best disarm it in an emergency. Your electrical panel, in many emergencies, it's important that you turn off the power to your home. So know where the master circuit breaker is and how to turn that off. and your water. Again, many emergencies will require you to turn your water off. And I believe I need to emphasize here that you should be turning off your house water, not the valve that's out at the street. I think those, for the most part, are locked. Don't spend time messing with those. Those may be needed by firefighters or for other purposes, but turn off your house supply, know where it is, and know how to turn it off. All considerations around your home. As you exit your home in an emergency, have a pre-arranged emergency meeting place, someplace close to home, someplace not close to home. So the Beacon House Community Center is a potential for your family to agree this is where we'll meet if we're on different parts of the island and an emergency happens. The muster locations, again, emphasizing those. I can't emphasize enough how much easier it is to find each other if you have a predetermined place to meet. Again, out of Lytton, we heard stories, and every disaster you hear stories of families being separated because things happened so quickly while they were carrying about their normal business and not really being able to find each other. It would be a panicky situation. In terms of Beacon House as a focal point in the case of an emergency, Kathy, I believe it was mentioned, the idea of an immediate warming center over a shorter term. We have acquired a generator, so in the case of a power outage, we can keep Beacon House warm and charge cell phones, laptops. It becomes our communication center, as I keep saying. In addition, washrooms will be there, coffee, tea, water potentially. And since the heat wave that we've just had, speaking about a warming center seems kind of odd, but we're at the very, very early stages of exploring the idea of becoming a cooling center as well. And so we'll see if that ever comes to pass. But in the world of climate change, overheating may become a part of our disaster response, need to respond to overheating. And then in terms of catastrophic disaster recovery center,
Jim, can I,
yes.
Sorry, can you speak up just a little bit more?
Oh yes, sorry, I will try to speak louder. My voice tends to drift. Thank you for that.
Okay.
I hope that's better.
That's much better, thank you.
Great. In terms of the more catastrophic situation where we're stuck in a disaster situation on the island for a number of days or even weeks, the Lions Club is looking at the idea of the problems we may have related to accessible water, the need for first aid kits, blankets, temporary shelter. All of those things are considerations, but they do not replace the importance of personal preparedness. And so to the extent that each of us is prepared ourselves to care for ourselves, then Beacon House does become that place of information, coordination, and warming, cooling. But to the extent that we're not prepared individually, then we may be able to have some very limited ability to provide other sorts of supports. Most importantly in an evacuation is the proximity to the Gallows Point dock and ramp and the dog park, which serve as the best air and sea evacuation opportunity we have on the island. And so Beacon House overlooking that area again forms a focal point for that activity. If you have school-age kids, I am 99.999% sure your school has an emergency plan and emergency policies. We need to be aware of what those are as parents. Know your school's emergency policies. If you haven't already, designate someone who can pick up your kids if you are unable to do so. That's probably part of the process. Save or write down the contact information for the school or schools that your kids attend. Again, in an emergency, you may not, you think you know the number, you might not remember it. And so write it down. Plan for pets. Knowing the location of pet-friendly shelters or hostels or hotels when you get to the other side. Packing extra food and water in your emergency kit, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Saving or writing down any of the vet information, medication information, and in the case of an emergency evacuation, considering designating neighbors who may be keeping an eye out for or watching for your pets in case you can't. And planning for special needs. These are things like prescriptions. Have a copy of your prescription with you in case you need to refill it at some future date. Have an extra supply of your medications. If you have an electric wheelchair, is it possible to have a manual backup in case your electric chair can't navigate the rubble working through an earthquake situation? Service animals, there's needs related to them. Medical equipment like hearing aids, you need extra batteries. The slide says include a writing pad if verbal communication is difficult. Include a writing pad anyway, because you may not have a problem with verbal communication now, but in an emergency, that might become a problem. So add a paper and a pencil, simple tools that could save your life. So those are all considerations around the planning question. The next step, the third step, is building your kit. Having the right supplies on hand will give you peace of mind, safety and comfort during any kind of an emergency situation. It's important to understand that there's two types of kits. A household emergency kit for sheltering in place over a longer period of time, and then a smaller grab-and-go bag that you can pick up and take with you at a moment's notice if you need to evacuate. And so we'll talk about each of those a little bit. The home emergency kit should contain 3 to 7 days, maybe up to 10 days worth of supplies to keep everyone safe and comfortable in your home. Scenarios where a kit could become handy, mainly for us, relates to earthquakes, the severe storm, power outage, water outage kinds of situations. What's in a basic emergency kit? You need to put your supplies in 1 or 2 containers, plastic bins or duffel bags. Store them where you can get at them. Keeping in mind that if we're in an earthquake situation and you put your emergency kit down in the crawl space and your house comes down, that kit is not going to be accessible. So think through, again, know your hazards, think through what the hazards are, and place your emergency kit in a place where you will be able to get at it in an emergency. Items to include: non-perishable food, as we say, for 3 days to a week. Remember a can opener. If you've got cans in there, you need a can opener. Water recommendation is 4 liters per person per day for both drinking and sanitation. And don't forget to include your pets in that water ration calculation. Phone chargers, battery banks, if you're a highly technical person, an inverter, battery-powered hand crank radios and flashlights, extra batteries, first aid kit and medications, the toiletry items that you need. Some people may want an extra pair of glasses or extra contact lenses. A copy of your emergency plan. It's not necessarily just good enough to write it down and hope that you'll remember it. Throw a copy into your emergency kit, and then it's there if your memory starts to fail you in a panic. And it can actually be the source of easing your worry and helping you to move forward effectively, but it needs to be in your kit, along with other important papers. Cash and small bills. Don't throw a $100 bill in there, because if you're in an emergency, chances are nobody will have change. So small bills, garbage bags and moist toiletry, or towelettes rather, for personal sanitation, seasonal clothing and footwear. Dust masks might be important if you're in an earthquake situation. There'll be a lot of particulate matter in the air. A whistle is a good signaling device. So you get the idea. Grab and go bag is for the case where you get the call either through the phone tree or voyant alert, or you observe that there is an issue at hand where you need to evacuate right away. You know where to go, but don't forget to grab and go. Grab your bag, and you will have the things that you need. Now, a grab and go bag is similar to, but different from your emergency kit for your house. You don't need to stuff a week's worth of food in there. Food that's ready to eat, like power bars or other ready to eat foods to just get you over the hump. Water to get you from where you are to where you'll be safe. Some of the things are the same. Phone charger, battery banks, flashlight, hand crank radio, those kinds of things, extra batteries, the medications, and so on. Important also to have your emergency plan in there. Again, that source of your own personal knowledge for where to go and how to get there, key addresses, important papers, the pen and notepad that I mentioned before, a whistle for signaling. So that's a quick walk through the grab and go bag for those emergency evacuations. Now there is a ton more information out there, and I can't emphasize enough the volume and quality of information that's available at preparedbc.ca. You can get booklets, hard copies or downloads from that site, and as Kathy mentioned, she has a good supply of the material that was handed out a couple years ago. There's information here available online if you want to delve into more detail on any or all of these topics. The thing that you'll find over and over again in these booklets as you read them is that most important thing is personal responsibility. Be prepared for yourself and your loved ones. Your community will be around you and as supportive as possible. But it all starts with, and a successful disaster response and recovery starts with personal responsibility and you being prepared for yourself. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. Before I hand it over to Peter, though, I want to add my own thanks to the committee that's been working on this for a long time. I'm just actually a latecomer to this group. There has been just a ton of work done by so many folks to ensure that Protection Island is a prepared community. So thank you to them. Thank you to Prepared BC, who provided a lot of materials, including big chunks of this presentation. And it gives us a good foundation for moving forward as a resilient and prepared community. So I'm going to pass it back to Peter, and Peter will be able to moderate or address questions. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. I did have some chats, hang on. Okay, so I've just gone through the chat list here, and I'm just going to read off the questions that I have. Are we assigned to a muster point by address? No. The muster points have nothing to do with your address at all. It's whatever is the closest one to you. It's possible that you won't be able to get close to your home, you know, during a particular type of catastrophe. So it's whichever one is the closest to you and the safest for you to get to. Bruce Shuck says if there's a tsunami, the signs will be pointing in the wrong direction. Well, maybe. I'm not sure where a tsunami would hit us, but the point is that we, you know, we do need some place where we can gather, and those 4 points were decided on by the city of Nanaimo, not us. So they may be facing the wrong direction, but unless we know where to go, it's probably best just to keep them in mind. Corey says the visiting vessel pier breakwater is very high and could be difficult for commuter boats. Quite possibly. You know, what the city has decided to do, we can't change. That's their way of dealing with us. They will bring boats over. I think they've made arrangements, arrangements with different people to come and pick us up and take us by boat over to the pier. So I'm sure they've got some kind of thing worked out to get us up onto it. As far as people with their own personal boats, not much I can do about it, folks. That it's not necessary that you go in person to the pier. It's necessary that you register, whether you register online, by phone, or come to a determined reception center. That doesn't matter. You don't have to go to the pier if you're in your personal boat. Just register. With all the FireSmart sprinkler systems that we've installed, should we do a test of how effective the sprinklers will be with PI water pressure? Rick, you want to answer that one?
Sure, I think that's a great idea, because somebody actually mentioned that the other day about if we turned everyone on at the same time, what's that going to look like? So I think maybe that's a pretty good trial sometime over the summer here, to pick a day and everybody set them up and turn them on and see what happens. Blow our water system up or something.
Good plan. Also, stay on the line because I got another question for you. Do electric powered golf carts pose a risk as an ignition source? You mentioned muffler hot exhaust systems for gas powered vehicles being an ignition source. Just wondering if we need to recognize the risk for electric cars.
There's pretty minimal risk. The only thing maybe sparking or something. I know with this hot weather and you get dust on your batteries, they can spark or arc or whatever. But overall, it's the internal combustion stuff. The mufflers are so hot. Like, for example, up until a couple of years ago, we used to cut Pirates Park basically towards the end of July. Not Pirates Park, Smugglers Park. And the grass would be pretty tall, all completely dry, and it would usually take about 3 days to cut it, because just a couple laps around and everything's heating up on the tractors. We'd have to stop and then come back the next day when it's cooler and do it again. So you can just smell it. And so we've kind of adjusted. Nancy's been kind enough to help us pick the right time to actually cut the park, put a little bit of science into it. So we kind of we're cutting better for plants, but we're also avoiding cutting when the grass is so dry. So it seems like it's kind of a silly thing, but man, long grass can start pretty fast from anything that's hot, for sure.
Thanks, Rick. Another question, what emergencies would require us to turn off the main water connection? Well, the main water connection, what they're talking about in the EMBC slides, is the connection that's actually inside your house, and it's just to protect your house in case water lines break during the shaking in an earthquake, that kind of thing. I'm sure that there's other reasons as well, but I know that that would be one. If anybody has any further feedback, I'd like to hear it. Okay, seems people are being adequately addressed for emergency preparedness, There are a number of pets, animals on PI. Some may escape during an emergency and they will need to be caught, caged, and have food and water. Is there an area at Beacon House to assist with pet care? The answer to that at this time is no. It's not something that we're looking at, and it's the same in the city of Nanaimo. They don't have the facilities to look after animals there as well. Our main priority is to look after, you know, the human members of our communities. If you are looking after your pets and you have cages for them, there could be transportation to, you know, to like a pet hotel or whatever, but at this point, we don't have the facilities to deal with pets. Might be something we can consider later on, but we got a long ways to go before we get there. Comment, when completing the school's emergency contact information form, consider including someone on the city side as someone who can pick up your kids rather than a neighbor here on the island who may be stuck here like you are. Very good point. That's extremely important. Everybody should have a contact on the mainland. Everybody, whether you've got kids or not. Okay, thank you so much for this great presentation and links to follow. We will get those links out to everybody. We appreciate your joining this session because it's really important to us that the community become a little more resilient as we go along. After what we've seen with the lack of resiliency over the last little while, anything we can do is important. So thank you for joining us for this one. If fire from Newcastle, the gap won't be an evac point. When hydro lines come down, need to stay clear. Good points on both of them. It's common sense, folks. If you can't get to one evacuation point, get to the next closest one. And absolutely stay clear of hydro lines. We've been there before. We need to contact a contact number for the Live in Newcastle Management and Security. Last night, we thought there were 2 campfires burning and could not contact anyone on the island. Those of us who live on the Newcastle side are watchful for problems with campers, etc. Totally agree, but it's not anything that we can do from the island. Those kinds of calls should be placed through 911 to be sure. You know, the dispatch of even our own fire crews on the island here doesn't come from here. It comes from the city. Well, it's actually 911 goes to Surrey and then back to the city. But the point is that we don't dispatch anybody from the island at all. So just be aware of that. It has to go through the city of Nanaimo. Kate, okay, help sign and having your street number visible helps the fire department. Good to practice different scenarios for earthquakes. What do you do in your car, bed, etc.? Muscle memory, Shakeout BC. That's a good thing to look at. If Beacon House not available, where would we go besides the community garden? We are looking at a backup for Beacon House, obviously, because we don't know what would happen. But the area around Beacon House is still probably the safest place to go. We could all gather in the dog park and figure out what to do. The point I'm making here is that Gallows is the perfect place for evacuation at this point on the island, because we could get a helicopter in there if we needed to get some seriously injured people off. We can get any size boat in there that we need to most of the time. So it's probably the best place to gather. If necessary, we could set up temporary shelters. We'll figure something out. We don't have our plan fully incorporated yet, obviously. We've only been working on it for a year. This takes years to get this together, folks. But we will be working on as much as we can. I got a bunch more messages. I'm just trying to find them here. Where'd they go? I think I got everybody. If anybody has any other comments, I don't see any on my chat screen here. Just go ahead and unmute yourselves, and we'll have an open forum here for a few minutes. Yeah, and yes. Anybody? No? Okay, well, if there are no more questions or nothing else, stay tuned because none of our groups are going anywhere. We work well together. Lynn, are you trying to say something or are you good? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I was gonna type it, but then it was like, I can't type that fast.
Okay, you go first and then I got somebody else that'll go right after you.
Okay, thank you. I worked a lot with the provincial government on emergency planning. And what everybody has done here is an amazing amount of work. And I have to say thank you to everyone. I've heard the practical parts of what's everybody's looked at. I have not heard about the administrative structure because usually in an emergency, an emergency management committee is struck, and then there's a hierarchy of, you know, the top manager, and it should have, and then a liaison, a person that talks with the Nanaimo. Usually would have a person from the fire department on there, and it's a core group that manages the emergency here, and I haven't heard that.
All right. Well, Kathy, would you like to talk about that?
I was just going to say, Lynn, you're absolutely right. And we are part of the city of Nanaimo. And we are looked at, even though we have unique and complex situations, we're looked at as a neighborhood in Nanaimo. And so we would not be managing a disaster. The management team in the city of Nanaimo, the province of BC, would be managing a disaster.
That is true, but they have to have a core point to communicate and get stuff. And that's usually done through a small group. When they're managing a disaster, they just can't willy-nilly just grab somebody in Protection Island and talk to them. There has to be a core emergency planning group.
Yes, yes. And that's been addressed through the city of Nanaimo as a neighborhood. Yeah. And I just, that's really.
And I'd like to be involved with you folks, but it really depends on time.
Yeah, exactly. It's also a good time to mention that Karen Lindsay, who is the emergency management coordinator, is that her title, Peter?
Yeah, that's correct.
She is the one person, management person in the city of Nanaimo. And I just want to mention she is so impressed with Protection Island as a neighborhood of the city of Nanaimo, particularly around FireSmart and the mitigation efforts that FireSmart has done, as well as the preparation that we've done, as well as having 5 members from Protection Island on the city of Nanaimo ESS team.
Excellent.
She's very, very, very pleased with Protection Island and has stated a number of times that we are probably better prepared, or not probably, we are better prepared as a neighborhood in the city of Nanaimo than any other neighborhood.
Yay for us.
Yeah, so I think that's a feather in our cap. I know with FireSmart, Rick, you can probably talk to that, but I think Protection is one of the few. Protection Island is one of the few that really got on board with the FireSmart activities, even though it was promoted to every neighborhood in the city of Nanaimo.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yep.
I would like an old-fashioned barn raising at my house, but not necessarily a barn, maybe just a small woodshed, because I've got a whack of wood stacked beside my house.
Valley, I know you had something to say. Thank you for your patience.
I just wanted to clarify my point about Newcastle. I'm not expecting that we wouldn't call 911 in an event of a fire, but on our side of the island, we see if there are beach fires when often it appears the caretakers do not. So right now, in this time of such dryness, we were all gathered last night on the shore debating whether we should go over in our kayaks to see whether they was actually fires or now the propane
Fire
ring
pits.
looks exactly like a fire. And the one that we thought was a fire got put out. We don't know how. The other one turned out to be a propane ring. But what I think is if we just could call, as we used to be able to, the caretaker who's on site and say, go check it out, It would be the most effective thing. And
Um,
none of our numbers work anymore.
One of the things that that we've been offered is that Captain Tim Doyle of the City of Nanaimo Fire Department
Mhm.
will take your calls on anything like that. And so he's more than willing to help us out. And if you did call him, he would be able to get a hold of the people on Newcastle, and that might be more efficient for you.
Well, I just know last night Doug Ruff spent 15 minutes trying to get through on 911, non-emergency, couldn't. It was push
Yeah.
this, push that. It was a complete disaster, so he came to us. Soon we had 5 of us involved trying to figure out, is it a fire? Should we call 911? What should we do? We don't want to call Wolf because it happens frequently.
Under the fire over there.
It's not-
Say that again, Neil?
I was just going to mention that a week or so ago, I talked to Karen Lindsay about our concerns around Newcastle Island, the fact that they have no fire protection team over there, and the fuel load is so bad over there, and talked about the danger not just to Protection Island, but to the city of Nanaimo, because Newcastle Island is pretty narrow.
Yeah.
Channel.
The Newcastle Channel, I should say, is pretty narrow. And so that whole Brecon Hill is at risk if there's a fire on Newcastle Island. And she really took it in what I was saying and the concerns that we had on Protection Island. She said, unfortunately, we have no jurisdiction there. We have no power there. It's not City of Nanaimo property. It's provincial park, you know, managed by the Nanaimo band. But she said, I'm going to look into some of your concerns. So, just so
All
you
I
know.
think we need is a phone number where we phone the caretaker
Yes.
and say, we see something suspicious, and they send their little ATV to check on it. Because
Yes,
they cannot
absolutely.
see it from wherever they are, and we can.
Yeah, I totally agree, Valerie.
You might be able to get the number by phoning the band office.
Also, Nadine, who's I don't know if I think her husband's the actual caretaker, but she's on Pro-Isle, on Facebook Pro-Isle.
Okay,
Yeah.
We could probably get in contact with her to get the number.
good plan.
I'm willing to, I'm going over there because I'm not going to stay up worrying late nights about this all summer.
Mhm. No,
We
I
need a
agree.
number.
Well, it's good. That's good brainstorming. So you can, you think it's on, did you say on the Facebook Pro-Isle site? Okay, maybe somebody can get that information to Valley. If they
I can
wouldn't
do
mind.
that. Yeah, I can try and find it that way. see if
Thank
it
you.
works.
Otherwise, as Rachel says, we could phone the band too.
Phone the band, walk
Or
over.
the nation.
What is the name of the caretaker? Do we know? Is it Phil?
I met him, but I forget his name. But her name, I'm pretty sure, is Nadine.
Nadine Rigsby. is her
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I just know last time I was on Newcastle a few years ago, I approached the pavilion staff to ask them, and they didn't know who the number.
Well,
of
he
the-
seems really friendly, and he was, happy to meet Protection Islander when we saw him not long ago.
Well,
Excellent.
let's make that relationship so that we can be helpful to him. That's all we want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very good point. Thank you for that. I think it's really important because yeah, they could jeopardize our lives pretty much. So good.
Us first.
Yes, yes. Okay, is that all the questions? Because if so, we'll wrap this. We went a little over what we expected, but I really thank everybody for their patience and for their attention to this. Please let your neighbors know that we are recording this. It will be on the Protection Island Lions YouTube site. Is that correct? I think that's correct. If one of us can figure out how to get it there. So we'll work on it.
You basically give it to me and I post it up there.
Perfect. It's on its way. It's on its way.
When my laptop gets fixed.
Okay, I guess that's it then, folks. Thank you again. Hopefully you've learned a little bit and we've been helpful with what we're doing. We're not quitting. We're not going anywhere. The committee, as it has been, is likely to change into one of volunteering now for future events, but we're not going anywhere, none of us. And like Kathy said, there's a whole bunch of us that are taking all kinds of training and coursework to keep us safe. Okay?
Thanks for the great presentation and for all the work everybody's doing. Yay, Protection Island.
Thank you. And thank you, Jim, for moderating. Much appreciated.
And stay safe and fire free.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.